Wrestlers ended a weekend-long drought for American gold medals in the Goodwill game by winning 3. However, the Soviet Union showed they are the dominant power in world wrestling. Bruce Baumgartner, John Smith, and Dave Schultz were the only wrestlers to defeat the Soviets in all the competition.
Turner Network Television proudly presents the 1986 Goodwill Games from Moscow and from Madrid. Brought to you by Diet Pepsi, the one-calorie choice of a new generation. And by Bud Light, the light beer with the first name in taste. Everything else is just a light.
And by CNN, the world's most important network and a proud sponsor of the Goodwill Games.
And now, here is the host of the 1986 Goodwill Games. From Moscow, Bob Neal.
Hello and welcome to our late night coverage of the Goodwill Games. Well, it was a very big day from an American point of view. It seems as if the American athletes started closing that gap with the USSR, who have a big lead in medals won over the 10 days of competition. This past weekend was a very big one in the Goodwill Games, and from it a very definite pattern emerged. The Soviet Union took medals in no less than 4 major events, leaving the U.S. athletes to occupy the lower steps on the medal stands. After a very solid performance in the first 6 days, the U.S. did not win a single gold medal on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, their longest drought of the games thus far. In volleyball, the U.S. women had been struggling almost from the start. They were upset early by North Korea and seemed in the opening days of the tournament to be a team of no great promise. But this is sport, and with it comes the anticipated surprises of competition. On Saturday, the women found themselves across the net from Japan, and when they won 3-0, the team that had apparently been out of the tournament walked away with the bronze. The Soviets had a more predictable path through the tournament. In fact, they were never seriously challenged. They beat Peru 3-0 in the finals and finished the tournament not only undefeated, but having lost only 2 games. Compared to the Soviet Union team, all others looked insignificant. At the diving pool, the story was much the same. From the United States, Michelle Mitchell, the 1984 silver medalist in Los Angeles and one of America's premier divers. She took the bronze in the 10-meter competition. But the highest honors were reserved once again for the Soviets. Gold medalist Angela Stasiulevich performed brilliantly and consistently. Her teammate, Olga Blinkova, won the silver. In the men's 10-meter competition, Dan Watson, a young graduate of Harvard, dove well indeed, enough to win the silver. The generally disappointing performance of the highly disciplined Chinese divers was somewhat mitigated by the fact that Gao Feng won the bronze. Then when the water cleared, it was Sergei Gurilev who bowed to receive the gold. His was the best performance by far and included the single best dive of the entire diving competition. We introduced you to 2 new sports at the Goodwill Games. The first was tennis, where high winds, bad weather, and rain forced a delay and a search for indoor facilities. The second was yachting from Tallinn Bay on the Baltic Sea, 500 miles northwest of Moscow. Competition got underway in 7 classes. But on this weekend of diversity, we saw 10 different sports in all. The script played out through the desire of the athletes always came out the same. USA wrestlers, who were led by Bruce Baumgartner, won a bronze, defeating Mongolia 8-2. But once again, it was the powerful Soviets, machine-like in their consistency, sweeping Bulgaria 10-0 for the gold. The New news for American fans was a little better at the Olympic Sports Complex. Harvey Richards led the way as many of the U.S. boxers advanced. A team decimated only days ago by a Department of Defense ban, and now hoping to turn a last-minute effort into a lasting memory. Perhaps the most frustratingly symbolizing event of the weekend was for the American athletes who came in the gold medals through water polo. Although the U.S. had great hopes, their golden-haired team was never really close. The Soviets won. Even in Spain, half a world away, there was a sense that uncertainty was knocking at the door of the U.S. Having come through the first round with a 5-0 record that sounded better than it really was, the U.S. team went to Oviedo, played sloppy basketball, and paid for it, losing to Argentina 74-70. At the end of the weekend, there was the realization that the Goodwill Games are a truly international event, a reminder that seemed as disappointing as it was useful to understanding the larger scope of these games. But of course, this week, we began to tell a story, the story of the concluding days here in Moscow, and it could be that the U.S. teams, led by the men's volleyball squad, will finish atop the medal stands once again. So we're going to have our Goodwill coverage of our late-night program, and Steve Lundquist, who's been with us before, will be joining us in just a couple of minutes. We'll be talking to Steve about his observations on the games and on the competition here in Moscow. We'll also be coming back to take a look at the medal count and how the Soviets and Americans are stacking up along with the other countries, and we'll also be meeting those gold medal wrestlers from the United States. So please stay with us. Let's get up to date now on the medal count. The Soviet Union proving to be very strong, as most people thought they would be. I would remind you once again that the Soviet Union and the United States are the only two countries who are competing with athletes in every one of the events here. All the other countries, there are some more than 70, are competing in less than all the events. So at the end of the 10th day, the Soviet Union, a total of 150 medals. The United States, 96. They're 59-34 in gold medals, then followed by Bulgaria, East Germany, and Romania. And I might remind you that those other countries are not competing in all the events. The United States may be on a little bit of a comeback to narrow that gap, however, as the wrestlers today did win 3 golds. And speaking of that, Bruce Baumgartner, Dave Schultz, and John Smith were spectacular at the wrestling today against very tough Soviet wrestlers. They came to our studio earlier and talked with Nick Charles.
Well, just when many thought the American effort was stuck in the mud, along came 3 guys to get us going with gold medals. Congratulations to all of you, Bruce Baumgartner, John Smith, Dave Schultz, and Nancy and little Alexander, who made the trip from Moscow. Let me ask you all, first of all, I'll start on this side. Bruce, you beat your chief nemesis in this. Describe what happened, especially being behind.
Yeah, well, I was behind. I think it was 3-0 at one point. Come back to tie it 4-4 and win on criteria. I was happy. That's the first time I've ever beaten them 2 times in a row.
What takes over when you're behind? I mean, does the adrenaline pump more? Does fury replace fatigue? What do you do? I mean, you can't be passive in wrestling. That's the beauty of this sport.
Excuse me, everybody.
Apologize for the beginning of that wrestling interview. As I told you, it was recorded earlier today, and they stopped the tape and re-recorded it, and we were queued up to what is called in the television biz a false start. So they'll get to the correct start. That happens at 100-meter track. Can happen once in television, right? We'll be back to the Nick Charles interview with the wrestlers, and thank goodness we have Steve Lundquist with us here, because Steve is flexible, if nothing else. And we'll chat with Steve for a little bit. Steve, first of all, I know you're about ready to go back home. You've been here for all 10 days of the competition. And something that happened just the other day I wanted you to tell us about, because I did not get to attend, and that is a reception at the U.S. Ambassador's house, and former President Richard Nixon was there. Tell us a little bit about it.
He was there. He came and sat with the athletes at their table, and we talked about policy and everything else you ever wanted to ask a president. And at the very end of it, he said, I don't know much about playing the piano, but last time I was here, somebody got up at the end of the reception, played the piano, and I can't play as well as he did, so I'm going to play God Bless America. And could everybody join in? And sure enough, we all went over to the piano, probably 200 of us. Wow. Sang around. It's kind of like singing around the campfire, essentially. Yeah. There were very many teary eyes, everything else. The Soviets were there. They sang along. I guess they said, God bless the Soviet Union, that type of thing. But we had so much fun.
Oh, that's great. I understand when you were talking, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, you know how you hear about parties and such, but I understand when you were talking to former President Nixon, you asked him what he might have done in the 1980 Olympic boycott situation when at the time, President Carter called for the boycott of the American athletes. Could you share with us what he said?
He had quite an interesting answer. I did ask him, I said, what would you have done if you were president at the time? He goes, well, if I were president at the time, that situation would have never been there. So it kind of broke up the whole table, and we went on to other questions about defense, and you name it, we asked him everything.
I want to come back and talk to you some, particularly about the water polo game, the gold medal game between the Soviet Union and the United States. I know you know a lot about it and saw that, so we'll come back and recap that, and stick around with us for the whole hour, if you will.
You bet.
Okay, and we'll be right back in just a minute. Matter of fact, we're staying right here, and we're going to pick up on some volleyball action today from two of the contenders in the men's volleyball tournament. You may have heard already us talking about the fact that the U.S. men's volleyball team is favored to win the gold in volleyball. Most people think they're the best team in the world right now. Of course, as usual, the Soviet Union strong. One of the other contenders in the top 4 or 5 in the field is the team from Brazil. We're going to get a chance to see both of those teams, the Soviet Union and Brazil, in action right now.
Our score is now 12-2. The Soviet Union leads Brazil in game number 3. The USSR took game number 1, 15-9. They took game number 2, 15-6. And now they're enjoying a 10-point lead in game number 3. This is the first round of action for both of these teams in the Savine Cup, which is part of these Goodwill games. I'm Leandra Riley along with Mike O'Hara, and Brazil really isn't as bad as these scores seem to indicate.
Well, they're just coming off of a long trip in from Rio, and the Soviets, of course, don't have to travel, so maybe jet lag has something to do with it. But they're really outmanned. The Soviets are just up there with a wall every play and hitting that ball well. And, of course, Zaitsev is leading them brilliantly.
And after scoring 1 point, it'll be a side out for the Soviet Union. 12 serving 3. Also in the pool with the USSR and Brazil are France and Poland. The best 2 teams from that pool will survive to the medal round.
Both of those teams, by the way, are very good teams. Poland has always been a perennial strong team. They're coming back, and France is an up-and-coming team. So I think it's going to be a real dogfight as to who's going to get the second spot. I think the Soviets are assured of the first, and I think we'll wind up seeing them in the semifinals or the finals.
On the other side of the coin is the other pool, and that's the USA's side, and that's Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and Japan. So you predict that the Soviet Union will survive this pool, the USA will survive the other pool. Who else will come from this pool, and who else will come from the other pool?
Well, based upon the way Brazil is looking right now, the last time I saw France play, they were looking very sharp, and they could pull it out, or Brazil could get back. It may just be a bad match against a great team. So there's a lot of competition in both sides, definitely the U.S., and if I had to pick another team, I would probably pick the Czechs to pull that one out. They're a strong team and seem to be on the upswing.
All right, we're at game and match point for the Soviet Union. Off the block, side out. And the Soviet Union has a problem at game point. In the first game, it took them 3 times to close the door. In the second game, it took them 5. They seem to get to 14 points and on the line. Nope, out. Boy, I thought that caught a piece of the line.
It's a tough angle from where we are. That referee's looking right down the line. That's why tennis players go bananas when they get those balls called wrong. The wall was up. Brazil perseveres.
Substitution, Luis Rodriguez coming into the game, exiting Bernard Rasmussen.
Going for the height now. They need a big block.
Coming in for the Soviet Union is Lilipiu.
Substitution in USSR team number 12 enters.
You got 6'3", 6'6", and 6'5" blocking, which is the best that Brazil can do.
That went off the block, side out. For the second time now, it is game and match point for the Soviet Union.
On the other hand, you have the Soviet block, which averages probably about 6'7" up there. Ooh.
Oh, and it ends not with a bang, but with a whimper. 15-3 is our final score in this third and final game of the match. The Soviet Union took the first game 15-9, the second one 15-6, and this one 15-3.
Yeah, it was all Soviet Union. They were never stopped. They were never even pressed very much in this match, and it'll be interesting to see whether that's because they were so omnipotent or because the Brazilians were a little bit shaky out there. We'll find out as this great competition here among the best teams in the world in men's volleyball continues.
All right, in Pool A, the Soviet Union is now 1-0. Brazil is 0-1 in the standings. They will play 2 more matches to decide who goes into the medal round. For Michael O'Hara, I'm Leandra Riley. So long from Lennon Central Stadium, Smaller Arena.
Been struggling in the Goodwill games of 1986, and it has nothing to do with the tournament or the players. It has to do with the weather in Yermala. Yermala is about 500 miles northwest of Moscow in the Baltic Sea area. It's actually in the Federation of Latvia at the Daugava tennis complex there. The weather has been horrendous. It has been rainy, it has been cold and windy. They've had to move the play from the very fine outdoor courts. The courts there are red clay. They have excellent seating facilities and hosted some of the Davis Cup play just a couple of years ago, but the rain has been a real problem. They are playing indoors. Things aren't exactly on schedule, but let's update you exactly where the tennis is. First of all, let's look at what the women are doing graphically here to show you the picture of the women's tennis. First of all, we don't have a graphic on it, I understand, so I'm going to just tell you what happened. The women are in the quarterfinal play. There were 2 matches today. Larisa Savchenko of the Soviet Union won and moves on in the tournament. And the United States, probably the top hope for women in the U.S. is a woman by the name of Caroline Kuhlman, who is going to be a junior at Southern Cal and was one of the hottest collegiate women tennis players last year. She won and moves on. 2 other matches, one postponed today because of darkness, and the other, I know it's indoors, but it was because of darkness because it is naturally lit. And the other match is scheduled for tomorrow morning. It does involve a woman from the United States. That's Beverly Bowes. Now let's look at men's tennis. Men's tennis is into the round of 16, the top half of the draw here. Alexander Chesnikov of the Soviet Union is the tennis player who made it to the semifinals of the French Open. Leonyuk is also advancing. Brad Pierce from the United States, and it is Lech Bienkowski of Poland who moves along. There are some other results from the men's play. Alexander Zverev of the Soviet Union advanced, and Kelly Jones with a 7-6, 6-4, 6-2 win of the United States moved along. Kelly Jones also one of the United States hopes, along with Jay Berger, who advanced over Diaz Carlos Gomez of Argentina, 6-3, 6-1, and Marian Veda of Czechoslovakia also advanced. As you can see, that is down to the quarterfinals, the round of 8. Tennis taking place in Yermala, and we'll keep you posted on that as they move along. As I say, it's been topsy-turvy simply because of bad weather about 500 miles northwest of Moscow. So that's the latest on the tennis situation. And now we're going to rejoin the action at the volleyball venue for a couple of other strong teams. Japan's enigmatic. Nobody knows just how good this Japanese men's volleyball team is. However, most of the experts here say that the Czechoslovakian team could be the 3rd best following the U.S. and the USSR. So let's check them out. Look at them in first round action. Japan, Czechoslovakia.
6-13, Japan trying to come back in this 5th and final game of their match against Czechoslovakia. Nice off-balance attack. Good block again by Japan. 7-13.
And the fresh blood is starting to pay off. That Inui, who is a lefty, 6'4", just like the lefty on the other side of the court, number 10, Baborka, is playing awfully well right now.
Inui up on a block. Now the question is, will they say he touched it? And they will say, this referee over here is saying, yes, he did touch it. And Japan is vindicated. The rally continues.
The sharp eyes. You got 2 pairs of eyes on both sides of the court looking for those kinds of infractions. Nice call by the second official on the floor.
8-13.
Oh, everybody looking, nobody moving.
9-13, and Czechoslovakia is going to go for another timeout. And at this point in time, what do you tell your Chargers? You were up 13, what, to 3?
The momentum has shifted, and if you're coaching that Czech team, you say, okay, guys, let's start concentrating a little bit more. Let's start passing that ball so we can get all those hitters up there with the ball to hit at.
And the fresh blood theory for Japan has certainly proven to be true. They just needed some new faces in there, new energy from the bench. Of course, all these guys are out there playing that, you know, if I play well, coach will start me next match.
That's right.
So they're playing with something to prove.
This would be a beautiful comeback for the Japanese. They were dead in the water a few minutes ago.
Mitsuhashi serving. See what happens here. That gets around the solo block of Inoue.
Crunch. Novotny reaching off. That was a well-hit ball.
Kiska going back in the game, or Kiska will be exiting the game. Going in the game is Yuri Samek, a frequent substitution for serving. 13-9. Game and match point for Czechoslovakia. Now, in the last game, it took Czechoslovakia 12 times to put Japan away. 12 times they set a game point, and 12 times they gave it up on a side out. Let's see what they do here. Game point and match point this time.
Oh, nice play.
Still up, and out.
By inches. What a great dig, though.
That's all right. That's one.
Almost curtain.
We had to say that 12 times in the last game. Out. Nobody touched it on the block. Point. 10-14.
That time Boborka actually fell down on the previous play. He got back up. They set him, and he didn't look like he had his act together. Bad miss. They needed that ball.
Still alive. Can't get to it. 11-14.
Great play on the part of the Japanese. Here they come. Coming up the road. What a great match this has turned out to be, Leandra.
11-14. And that's out. Nobody touched it on the block. 12-14.
Caleb, who was doing things flawlessly, suddenly gets blocked one time and then hits out.
I think the Japanese coach should have gone to his bench a lot earlier.
Caleb hits out 2 times in a row.
13-14, and what a change of events here. Czechoslovakia has no timeouts remaining, so they have to keep on plugging. All right, here we go. Now they have a chance to set things up. Novotny goes off the block, but Japan can save it.
Yes, down. Wow, Hara comes through and delivers. And we got ourselves, look at that ball, off the block and way out of bounds. Suddenly a new ball game here.
What happens now is you must win by 2, so Japan needs 16 points to beat Czechoslovakia, and that will end this rally. Side out for Czechoslovakia.
Caleb finally got back to his dominance as a spiker of at that net.
So instead of needing 1 point, Czechoslovakia now needs 2 to put Japan away. For the second time, they are at that juncture.
Hara off the block and out of bounds. Picks on the little setter. That was...
We have a substitution for Furukawa coming in the game, as is Tanaka. So they're going back with the reserves, feeling they are rested. And out comes the inspirational fresh blood.
Well, maybe you go with your veterans. Let's see if the coach knows what he's doing.
I like what was working.
But Hara, again, offensively was pulling them through, and he picked on the 6'2" setter, Rajki, shortest man on that side of the court. So
jump serve coming up. I think, nope, he's just stepping back to take a deeper one. Furukawa sends it in short.
Caught a piece of the net. Crucial play.
14-14, substitution for Czechoslovakia. Coming in, Premislav Baha, and leaving is number 11, Janka. Baha being in the front row gives him some added height. Tanaka with the spike for Japan. Nice block by Japan again.
Oh, through ball. The setter wanted that ball, and the hitter just stood there and wanted to set it. Crucial mistake, and once again, momentum shifts back to the Japanese. Error on each side.
It's such a pendulum game. And now it is flung back to Japan, but
Caleb
yanks it back to Czechoslovakia.
bread and butter man.
And now going in the game is Mikiska. He has been in quite frequently. 14-14.
Got that big wall up there.
Must win by 2. Tanaka into the block. Nice up by Japan. Tanaka will go up. Triple block.
Snuck it through. Tanaka came off the bench fresh, goes up there against a 3-man block and gets it down. The Japanese have not been passing well. The last 2 passes were poorly executed, so there was no deception, and they got away with it this time.
14-14 still. Good solo block.
Nice play.
And that went off the Japanese fingers, so it'll be side out for Czechoslovakia.
Here we go, fresh man. Mikiska comes in there, rips that ball at 6-8. Playing well.
Miroslav Radke serving. Tomato goes out of bounds. 15-14. Second time for Czechoslovakia. They are a game and match point.
Again, a poor pass. Let's see what they do here.
Kumada dinks it over the block. Onataki trips over his own player to get to it. They're still on the ground. But everybody has collected themselves.
Tanaka can't get arrested.
Kumada. Oh! And nobody touches it. Game, match point to Czechoslovakia. 16-14. What an exciting conclusion to a 5-game match.
Czech really earned it. They came back strong after being down on the floor for the first 2 games. Again, the Japanese caught up in the 5th game. They held true, came back through when they had to, serve tough, got the bad passes, and then walled them off. Great finish for the Czechs.
For Michael O'Hara, I'm Leander Roddick. Congratulations to Czechoslovakia for winning their first match in the Savine Cup Volleyball Championship.
Action in all 7 classes of yachting today at Tallinn Bay on the Baltic Sea. Let's go now to Gary Jobson, who's on hand to report on some of that action.
As the men got ready for their start of the 470 class today, on the course watching the races was my former skipper and organizer of the Goodwill Games, Ted Turner.
Ted, I got to see Tallinn, Estonia, Soviet Union for the first time in 1978, and you got to see some of the slides while we were off doing the 12 meters for the America's Cup that year. What were some of your impressions?
Well, I mean, that was when the boycott occurred in 1980. I'm sure that seeing those slides and having you tell me your story of your very pleasant experiences over here, you know, going over the facilities and doing your spade work on what it was going to be like over here. I'm sure that had, I was sorry that the U.S. team wasn't here. I tried out for the Olympics in yachting 3 times. I never made it, but it was a real dream for me that never came true. And to see it disrupted the way it was, that had a lot to do, I'm sure, with our coming up with the idea to do the Goodwill Games.
You might not have made the Olympics, or at least you tried 3 times, but you made a lot of other regattas. What would you say would be the single most greatest sailing experience that you've had in your career?
Well, the most exciting thing certainly was the 79 Fastnet race, which you were with me on, you know, when the big storm blew up. That would be the most exciting. I guess that would be the most exciting.
Olympic competition, does it compare to the America's Cup competition that we've been involved in?
Well, you know, in sailing and in virtually all the amateur sports and the professional sports, the level of competition has risen so much in the last 40 years since I started getting involved as a little kid in competitive sailing. I mean, you virtually at every level of Olympic competition or that type of competition, kids now do it all the time, whereas they didn't when I was a boy, and I don't think they did really when you were either. So competition is a lot keener than it was in my time.
Right from the start, it was the East Germans that led the pack of the 470 men's division today, but close behind was the Americans, Morgan Reeser and Kevin Burnham. At the first mark, the East Germans led by 5 seconds. Reeser and Burnham were clearly gaining their confidence now, and on the 4th leg of the course, they passed the East Germans to take a commanding lead. As they rounded the mark, the Americans were quick to hoist their spinnaker. The hunger they missed in the earlier 2 races was now evident. You can see the East Germans passing on the left a long way back at this point. Americans continued on and had their first victory. Look how far the East German team was at the finish. A happy American crew heads for the beach. But in the women's 470 division, it was another story altogether. Canadian sisters Karen and Gail Johnson won their 3rd straight race, while Americans Peasy Herndon and Cindy Goff slipped back to 5th after another slow start. Always the optimist, J.B. Braun just made it around the port end of the starting line today in the Flying Dutchman class. When the Soviet team tacked away, Braun covered closely. But the local team was simply faster in the light winds and sailed to a big lead. Actually, the East Germans led early in the race, as we see here, taking their spinnaker down, but slipped back on the 4th leg when they fell into a hole with no wind. In light winds like you see here today, it takes a lot of patience to sail these boats, particularly in a Flying Dutchman, where the crews like heavy wind, big waves, and lots of action. In the Finn class, Buzz Reynolds improved yesterday with a 2nd over his 7th the day before. But the Soviet sailor, Dirk Pittelkoff, had a commanding lead and won by over 4 minutes. Meanwhile, East Germany, leading Buzz Reynolds by just a boat length, initiated a furious tacking duel. First, the East German tacks. Now Reynolds tacks away to clear his wind. He wants the 2nd place. He needs it for his standings. East German won't let him alone and tacks back on. Reynolds doesn't hesitate a second and tacks again. East German doesn't want to let anything go by, tacks on his breeze one more time. Reynolds keeps the heat on, tacks back to starboard. This is racing at its best. Finally, the 2 boats are on the lay line for the finish. The East Germans tack on top of Reynolds one more time and finish 2nd in the race, with Reynolds finishing 3rd. 26-year-old Kathy Steele looked good after the start today, but it was Polish sailor Joanna Brzezinska, only 17 years old, that won the race by 4.5 minutes. Steele, the American, got 2nd. The Cinderella story here in Tallinn has to be 20-year-old Mike Gebhardt. Here he's racing the Soviets, who he trailed the entire race. They're 4 boat lengths now from the mark. Gebhardt on the left, the Soviet sailor on the right. You can see how hungry Gebhardt is as he fans his sail across. 2 boat lengths to go now. They're both struggling. They want their flag. And it's Gebhardt, the American, by a nose. Happy, but also tired. Gebhardt has now won his last 2 races after being disqualified in the first contest 2 days ago. As the 3rd day of racing closed, the athletes gathered for the opening ceremonies, which had been earlier postponed. At the end of race 3 in the 470 men's division, USA 1st, East Germany 2nd, Soviet Union 3rd. In the women's 470, Canada 1st, East Germany 2nd, Soviet Union 3rd, USA 5th. In Flying Dutchman, Soviet Union 1st, Canada 2nd, USA 3rd. In the Finn class, Soviet Union first, East Germany second, USA third.
It can get more complicated than this, but to explain basically how the yachting works, there are 7 days of competition, 7 classes, and they have 7 races in each class. So you race 7 times, and basically after throwing out a time here and a race there based on the rules, they'll add up the time that it took for the races and the way they finished, and the lowest score will win the yachting. So when you see the standings of the U.S. and East Germany, Soviet Union, etc., that's after the 3rd race. They could, of course, change as they go through 4, 5, 6, and 7. Steve Lundquist has joined us for our late night show. And Steve, we were just talking as we saw Ted Turner on the interview there about the joy of that America's Cup a few years back, and you said that you've got some possible plans to go to Australia?
Very possible. My parents and I think, might be renting a little yacht and going to the Australia's Cup, hopefully soon to be the America's Cup again. And we're going to go out there, and it sounds like a very fun gathering, otherwise known as a party.
Would you save me a berth?
You bet.
I think that's what they're called.
That's right.
If I get my nautical terms down just right. Huh? I want to ask you a serious question here about the medal count situation. We're talking about, in every newspaper in North America carries the Goodwill Games medal count, and people are seeing that the Soviet Union are way out in front of the United States in medals count, in gold, silver, and bronze. And in some things, like wrestling, as example, and water polo seem to be dominating the event. What does this say to the U.S. athletic federations and preparation for the '88 Olympics? Is it disastrous news? Is it good news? Is it the kind of thing that educates them?
It's a double-edged sword. Essentially, it's bad for us to get beat. Anytime we get beat by the Soviet Union, or any country for that matter, it's not good for us mentally. But on the other hand, it's good for us knowing that we're getting our kinks out, so to speak, in these off years, getting the first time in 10 years, getting together with these groups, and realizing what international competition means again. Usually, the only time we've been against the Soviets or the East Germans are in dual meets, what they call dual meets, and
totally different pressure, isn't it?
Totally different pressure. It's not an Olympic-style format, and it's very different here. You've got to consider everything in a tournament against all the countries. You just can't look at one person or one other thing.
Might success here, or even failure by some of the athletes that are considered the top athletes in a particular sport, make some changes or cause some rethinking of some teams? Use a positive example of Sean Killian or Angel Myers of the young U.S. swimming team that came here. Might that give those kinds of athletes a boost toward '88 that they wouldn't have had otherwise?
Gives them an incredible boost. We haven't had, not only have we not had the competition, we haven't had the press, we haven't had any of those things. All that does is get the names out, gets people trying out for the sport. We had a 100% increase in swimming as soon after the Olympics. Those things do nothing but help the sport. Again, like the water polo team that we saw get beat by the Soviets, that we will go against them again at World Championships in Spain, same in swimming, everything else. We're seeing a group that is fairly well prepared, but not as prepared as we will be in the Olympics upcoming.
So it ought to be a positive force toward the Olympic movement.
Very positive.
From an athletic point of view, I'm not talking politics or anything of nature, but from an athletic preparation point of view. Every
time we've raced them, we've gotten better. So the more experience you get, the better off you're going to be.
And I think there's one other thing we might consider, and that is the Soviet, just basketball, for instance. In women's basketball, the Soviet Union had always dominated the sport. There is a new crown atop a new champion's head in women's basketball around the world, and it belongs on the head of the U.S. basketball players. But, as some of our experts were telling us, the Soviet Union now will also go to school, and you'll bet that the Soviet Union basketball teams are going to be better. Steve's going to stay with us, and we'll come back in just a moment. As a matter of fact, we're going to go back to that wrestling interview that we had kind of a rough start with earlier in the program with the 3 United States gold medalists and Nick Charles. So stay with us. We continue with our coverage of the Goodwill Games.
Dick's Goodwill Games are brought to you by Diet Pepsi, the 1-calorie choice of a new generation.
3 gold medals for U.S. wrestlers today to increase that medal count, but to also bring the wrestlers back from what they are considering themselves a disappointing performance here in Moscow in a team sense. And as we said earlier, we had a little bit of a technical problem with an interview that Nick Charles did earlier with the 3 gold medalists. Let's go back to that interview right now.
Well, just when we thought the American medal effort was bogging down, along came 3 guys seated around me to pick it up. Gold medalists tonight in wrestling. Nancy Schultz is with us, husband Dave. Nancy, I know you didn't participate tonight, but we saw you rooting, as we saw your little son Alexander making the trip from Moscow. Dave Schultz is with me. John Smith, Bruce Baumgartner. Bruce, you beat your chief nemesis tonight, correct?
Yeah, I beat him 4-4 on criteria. It was a good win. First time I've ever beaten him 2 times in a row.
We were talking about coming from behind and what it's like. Do you hear the clock ticking? Do you know your time? What's different about that when you had to come back and do it?
Well, it was tough. I made some mistakes early on in the match. I got behind 3-0. Come back to, I think it was 3-4 right at the end, and come with the last 20-second takedown to win it. It's mentally draining, you know, the pressure's on. You have one last try at a good technique, and I was fortunate enough to get it.
John Smith, you said that your brother has wrestled the guy you beat today, so you had it all planned, huh?
Yeah.
Did he scope him out for you pretty well?
I knew everything he did. I knew how he walked out on the mat. I knew how he shook hands with me. He helped me a lot. He told me his style, the way he prepared for the beginning of the match, and he scores early, and I knew I had to stop him from scoring that first period.
What's it feel like now? Gold medal?
Feels great, you know, at the age I'm at. I mean, not many people can say that right now, so it's hopefully I have a top future.
Dave Schultz, what's more important, beating the Russians or winning a gold medal? Beating the Soviets, I should say.
Winning a gold medal.
Doesn't matter against whom, huh? But it just
sure,
happens.
It's more important to me to win against a Soviet because I have so much respect for their wrestling system. But yes, which is more important? I say it's more important for an athlete to win than who he beats.
What about the Soviets? You have a special story to share in terms of your little boy, isn't he, in terms of friendship, Nancy?
He's named after, well, he's got a Soviet name. His name is Alexander, and he goes by Sasha, which is a nickname for Alexander in the Soviet Union, mainly because Dave has made so many trips over here, and we have a lot of Soviet friends, and it seemed like a good thing to do. His first trip was going to be to Moscow, so he's got a good name to start off with.
So the Goodwill Games isn't just a word or a phrase. Athletics can really lead to some understanding, huh? Certainly.
I think definitely. I think we've had a lot of good friendships, and it was nice bringing him over here. But the good friends, you know, paid a lot of attention to him, and it was fun.
Dave, how many times have you been here?
9.
And your impressions?
It's a different system. I find that people react and act differently sometimes in public because of the constraints of the system on them, but if you get them, you know, alone, people are people.
This is a party night, though, isn't it, for all of you? Yeah. Pretty special feeling, huh? Congratulations to all 3 of you. Thanks for being with us, and have a good trip back to America.
Thank you.
I know it's time for my favorite part of the late night report from the Goodwill Games in Moscow. As you know, we've had language difficulties, obviously, in broadcasting an event from all these venues with the Russian language, the English language, translations, etc. So we've been sharing with you some Russian phrases to give you an idea of the difficulty with the Cyrillic alphabet and everything else, and hope you're having a good time with it. We're going to continue with it tonight and see if you know what this one is here. I'm sure there's some people in North America getting this all the time. This is pronounced Medvedna Ukana Stupil. Now, I probably have the accents on the wrong way, but the pronunciation was relatively close. And I'll give you a hint. Steve Lundquist said that he was at a piano playing session with former President Richard Nixon, and they were singing during that time. And it's something that might have been said about Steve Lundquist singing.
Not might have. It was said.
We'll tell you when we come back. Stay with us. Okay, time for the answer for our Soviet phrase trivia. It was Medvedna Uka Nastupil. And as I said, it could relate to somebody singing. It is literally defined as a bear set on his ear. And we're not kidding. Now, this is really a Soviet phrase, and it would relate maybe to something being said in North America or the United States to, he can't carry a tune in a bucket. It is about a person who is musically tone deaf. A bear set on his ear. And Steve, show him where the bear set on your ear there. I understand. That was being said all over the U.S. ambassador's house when the folks were singing the other day. I know you're about to wrap up your stay here in Moscow during the coverage of the Goodwill Games. Appreciate your coming on the show and sharing your observations with us. You've told a funny story. I want you to repeat it. We only have a moment, and it had to do with you're having a little bit of problem getting through customs.
Customs.
Why?
Well, we have a thing over here called microwave popcorn. It's the best stuff in the world. It's what's kept us alive while we've been here, between that and the Pepsi. And we were going through customs, and we had all these boxes of what they call Pop Secret. And they thought it meant top secret, held up our bags and everything for 3 straight days. One of those stories that comes out of the Goodwill games that you laugh about.
Secret
the only thing
popcorn.
You can talk about.
Don't take any back or you'll be at the airport 4 or 5 hours
Forever.
Steve, thanks for being with us. Have a good trip.
All right.
It's been a lot of fun having Steve Lundquist with us here and giving us his observations on the Goodwill games. We'll have more guests tomorrow. Paul Horning will be on the late night program with us. Just quickly, be sure to be watching tomorrow. We'll have daytime coverage, prime time, and late night coverage of the Goodwill games. Tomorrow we'll have more boxing, yachting, volleyball, tennis reports, team handball, figure skating tomorrow night with Kurt Gowdy and Peggy Fleming. And the figure skating is going to be spectacular. Don't miss it. Tomorrow night we'll also continue with men's basketball coverage of the World Championships from Spain. U.S. still in it. They'll be playing Yugoslavia tomorrow, and we'll have it for you. See you, and thanks for watching. From Moscow, this is Bob Neal for Steve Lundquist. Das Padanya.